Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and today I am finally digging into the army lists for Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings version 2. If you want a brief synopsis on what changed from version 1 to version 2, I do have a video that talks all about that. Go see that in the description down below. But with these videos, really what I'm trying to do is look over the entirety of a given faction. We're going to explore the different spells and the hero options and list building ideas, things like that. We're using a mixture of the army list PDF and the online army reference or army builder. You can also just see a view all type thing. We're just going to be going through the various units in this episode, focusing on the Dweghom and really just talking about what role each regiment has within the army. Minor things like, points changes, here and there are going to happen in every game as balancing and fine-tuning happens. So we're not going to focus too much on that kind of minutia, but really looking at each regiment, seeing the special rules that it has and the officer options, and just kind of getting an idea of what you could generally use this regiment for. It's going to be a long one, so I hope you have some models to paint because we're going to talk all Dweghom today. With that out of the way, let's head over to the shared screen and start digging it. Now I'm going, of course, to have links to all these things in the description down below, the current army list documents and stuff like that. We're going to skip right ahead down to where we start talking about Dweghom specific stuff. This is just information on building an army and such. So, army rules. This is awesome because no matter what you choose for your Dweghom army, they're going to fall into a few categories and get some benefit. Firstborn children of war. All regiments in this army ignore enemy regiments for the purposes of determining their reinforcement line. This is a massively powerful ability. In the last event that I went to, I was able to take a block of Flame Berserkers, who are a light infantry option, and just rush them up the board, and they do still set the reinforcement line. As opposed to stuff like, I believe the Automata have rules that say you can't do that. That's totally fine, but what this allowed me to do was bring my Dragon Slayers in midway up the board from a flank that my opponent was not prepared for, and we absolutely decimated a unit of Bone Golems in the Old Dominion army. I will say though, this is probably one of the easier rules to forget, even though it has a massive impact on the game. So just kind of always be looking for opportunities on where you can flank your opponent. Also keep in mind that some of the current missions in the Bellum mission pack have sides or spaces on the flanks where nothing can come in from. So you have to really read the map, understand where it'd be useful, but this is a very, very cool trick. The next one here is the Pursuit of Dweghom. Now, if you're not familiar, Dweghom is their kind of in-lore currency of glory. Infantry regiments in this army without an attached character stand may have their command stand perform a free duel action. However, refusing the duel does not cause the enemy to become broken. If an enemy regiment is already broken, then the character stand attached to it may not refuse the duel. If the command stand suffers any wounds during the duel action, assign those wounds only to the command stand, including any wounds suffered from morale. These wounds do not spill over into the regiment. This will sometimes lead to an exception about allocating wounds to a regiment, where the command stand will be allocated wounds even though there's another wounded stand in this regiment. Basically, the rest of this is just telling you how to allocate wounds. It's important stuff to know, but really what it is, to put it very simply, every one of your officer stands in any given regiment can make a challenge as if it were a character looking for a brawl. So the rest of this is just basic information about allocating wounds, but really the core of it is every single regiment that you have in your army now has the ability to issue duels to enemy characters. If I have a unit of Thanes and they run into a regiment that has, say, a sorcerer or something like that, a chapter mage from 100 Kingdoms, I can now take my Thanes and issue a challenge to that wizard. Of course, they can refuse with no consequences unless they are broken, and there are many negative side effects to being broken and ways to be broken in the new edition. It went from being a status that didn't do too much to now being everything. What's also nice is that this is a free additional duel action, so you can inspire clash if you do break them, then trigger your free additional duel action where now you can force them into an attack, or a duel rather. So again, you're not going to want to do this every single time. However, there are a lot of command stand and officers and that kind of stuff that are massively game shaping. The first one that comes to mind is Old Dominion, have the guy carrying the casket, which essentially stops opponents from inspiring. This would be a fantastic thing on the charge. While you have your initial charge bonuses, pop this ability, try to get rid of that hero, and it frees up the rest of the regiment. Now, the next set of rules are something that's a bit more, I guess, familiar to us if you've played Dweghom before, and that's the creeds. Now, there are essentially two creeds that exist within the Dweghom, the Ardent and the Tempered. An Ardent Karawa has to always select the Ardent creed. The Tempered Sorcerer and Steel Shaper must always be Tempered, and the Holdray can be either one. He's kind of the general warrior hero. Now, I want to get the Ardent creed out of the way first, even though it's second in the document, just because I think it's a lot smaller and more contained here. But this one's called, the first time a regiment in this army would become broken during a battle, the regiment performs an out-of-sequence free additional rally or combat rally action at the end of the action that caused it to become broken. It only affects triggers once per battle for each regiment. Now, I'll see how, like I said before, being broken is now massively impactful. I would definitely say for other armies more than Dweghom, we tend to have fairly good resolves and a few spells, particularly from the Ardent Karawa, that allow you to break enemy units as well as restore the broken status for your guys. It's good. It just depends on what you're facing. Now, the Tempered Creed is where it tends to draw a lot more players just because of the dynamic nature of it. Each time a character stand successfully performs a spell casting action, gain an elemental power marker and add it to an elemental power pool. Additionally, you add one elemental power marker to the pool at the beginning of each round's supremacy phase. You may spend a marker from this pool to automatically count as a success, a single defense, clash, or morale test die of any friendly regiment stand within 8 inches of a Tempered Sorcerer or Tempered Steel Shaper character stand. The character stand or regiment may use as many power markers as they're available in their pool at any given time, and you have to declare it before you actually use it. So if you have to roll 6 dice, you're going to say, I'm going to use 2 of my power markers, and now you roll 4 dice, and you just assume 2 successes. Now, the reason I say that most players choose this is because it has a lot more, I guess, capability to it. You have 2 characters that can both be casting, so at any given turn, you can at least be generating 3 of these power markers. If you have a Tempered Sorcerer and a Tempered Steel Shaper, and the +1 you get just for having shown up every single round. So what can you do with 3 guaranteed successes for defense, clashes, and morale? Well, quite a bit. When you stack on top of this, as we will get later, there's a way to have your sorcerer cast twice. Well, now we're up to 4 elemental markers a turn, roughly. Imagine if 4 of your Dragon Slayer attacks just hit. That kind of stuff. Yeah, it gets pretty wonky when you start thinking about how you're going to get some of these lower heroes into range to be able to support these guys. But you have to remember, you can have your sorcerer, say, be on a Hellbringer Drake. He's going to be generating all kinds of power tokens because he's casting spells left and right. And then when you need to, you can throw a little Steel Shaper with a cheap unit up front to be able to deliver those things, because it doesn't actually matter which spellcaster they're near. If they're within 8 inches of any sorcerer or any Steel Shaper, these benefits can be passed to them. So with our army rules out of the way, let's talk about supremacy abilities. This is where we start to choose the actual warlord of our army. So everybody gets the reinforcement line thing, everybody gets the pursuit of Ogham, and everybody falls into one of 2 categories of Ardent or Tempered, with the Holdray being either or. But let's look at what we get by choosing our general. Ardent Karawa, if we choose him to be our general, we get Righteous Annihilation. For the duration of the battle, increase the march distance of all friendly regiments by 1 inch during their first march action each round. This supremacy ability is always to be considered active. In addition, once per battle, the Ardent Karawa can activate this supremacy ability. All friendly command stands add +2 to their attack characteristic until the end of the round. Now, this is a thing that's going to show up a few places where you're adding to the command stand's attack characteristic. Remember, this synchronizes so well with our pursuit of Ogham ability. We want to get our character stands, or rather the command stands, I should say, up into business to start delivering nasty attacks. The next one is the Tempered Sorcerer, Elemental Puissance. I don't know how to pronounce that word at all. This character stand may perform 2 spell casting actions each round, and you can't do the same spell more than once per round, and it's always considered to be active. This is how you get that second power marker out of a sorcerer. Living Metal, once per battle, immediately heal each friendly regiment for 6 wounds. Resolve each regiment fully before going back to the next. So once per battle, epic army-wide healing. Now, there is a thing to this. Remember, in 2.0, you can't heal if you're broken. So this is great if you're being like kind of whittled down over time. You'll probably restore a stand, if not top one off and restore another, given how many wounds the average Dweghom stand has. 6 is sufficient to either top one off or restore at least a half stand. But that is a great ability. And the last one here is the Holdray. If he is our warlord, in the presence of Memancers. For the duration of the battle, all command stands in the army add +1 to their attack characteristics, and it's always considered to be active. So this is, again, if we want to do our pursuit of Dweghom and get our regiments rushing up there and trying to break the enemy and just be very aggressive with our leaders, this is another great way to do it. I like the consistency of the +1 attack as opposed to a once per game +2 from the Karawa. If I had to pick any of these, like just purely based on their leadership abilities, by choosing to be a general, you can include like 3 to 4, warlords and warbands in your army if you want. So all these guys can be taken, but as far as which one you want to be your warlord to get his benefit, the Tempered Sorcerer is fantastic when it comes to the Tempered Creed, where you're accumulating power markers. That's really great. I think there's good arguments for the Steel Shaper if you're concerned about attrition, but you still have an eye on keeping your guys from breaking. It's funny because the Tempered Steel Shaper actually works really well with the Karawa, because the Karawa has basically priest spells, if you will, that unbreak a regiment of yours or break an enemy regiment, which ends up being exceptionally helpful if you want to use living metal, because you need your guys to not be broken by the end of a round to ensure that they can be healed at the next supremacy phase. And the hold rig is a nice consistent one. It's one of those things that it's probably great for learning the army just because there's so little to keep track of, and it's just always happening. If I had to pick, I'm going to go either the Tempered Sorcerer for spellcasting shenanigans or the hold rig. I know the Steel Shaper is awesome. I'm not the biggest fan of the model, but I think that there's a lot of game for him. I think he shows up in quite a few lists because his spell lore is baller, but as far as making him the general, I kind of like the other options more. And so at this point in the video, I'm actually going to switch over to the army builder. If you go into the main section, the army builder, you can say just browse factions, and it'll just pull this up. This is very, very helpful for me as someone showing you this information, simply because you can do this cool thing where if you open multiple, it'll let you compare. So we're going to be doing a little bit of that. So let's start our investigation of the individual regiment entries now that we're past the global rules and talk about characters. Let's get into the Ardent Karawa. He's a very interesting hero at this point because his spell lore, I think, has a inordinate amount of impact, but also is probably not very exciting. So he's Priest 5. Again, we're looking for successes. I need 2 successes to cast a spell specifically in version 2. His first one is Dismay, which is an 8-inch range, attunement 2, not easy to get. He requires number of successes equal to the lowest unmodified resolve value in the target regiment, and it becomes broken if you do so. So we have a way to break our opponents and resolve attunement 3, range 12 inches. This is targeting a friendly one, and basically it's as if they had used the rally action, so they get to remove the broken status. We already talked about his Supremacy ability. It's just listed here for convenience. I'm going to save the discussion for relics, masteries, and retinues for a dedicated spotlight, because that's where so much of the granular configuration of what your guys can do becomes really important. But the last thing I want to cover here are going to be his options for warriors. So his mainstays, the things you can take a bunch of: hold warriors, hold ballista, initiates, and wardens. Now initiates and wardens, that's actually 2 regiments from a dual kit that recently came out. In fact, the Ardent Karawa has the most, the newest models when it comes to basic infantry, particularly in the initiates kit is my favorite. The big guys with the shields, we'll get to them in a bit. But his restricted is Magma Forged, which is a new entry in 2.0 that we don't know much about, and the Flame Berserk. I firmly believe that once the Magma Forged are introduced to the game, this might be a more interesting option. Right now, Initiates and Wardens are competing for the same jobs that Hold Warriors and Ballista do, so unless you want them specifically for the miniatures, which is, I'm not going to put that down because it's a totally legitimate reason to pick a Karawa, is just to have fresh mainstay options that look great. Aside from that, Flame Berserkers, we'll get to them, aren't super crazy, but I think once Magma Forge drop, we'll see some more use for this guy. As is, I include him because I happen to love the Initiates models, and I do like having Dismay and Resolve on a stick. And again, in 2nd edition, you immediately get all the spells that a wizard knows from whatever schools that they have, but he only knows 2 spells. He's not particularly fighty, he's not particularly anything. I think he probably could have benefited from Resolve 5, but whatever. I mean, the Zealots, the Flame Berserkers are, I guess, more brave than him. And we'll move on to the Hold Ray. So this guy is a murder machine. Clash of 4, 5 attacks, super good. 5 wounds and 5 resolve, as is fitting. Now his special rules, all he has is cleave. Cleave 1. His supremacy ability again is giving +1 attack to all command stands to every regiment in the army. And he also has a little bonus here. If you have at least 1 hold reg, 1 infantry regiment in your army may include a Mancer's Apprentice at the indicated points cost, in addition to any other thing that they could take. If I am not mistaken, let's find that one. Yeah, here we are, Mancer Apprentice. This regiment gains the Fearless special rule, which is terrific. And when this regiment's command stand challenges an enemy character stand to a duel as part of a duel action, remember, anyone can do that. If the target enemy character stands decline, then their regiment becomes broken and the action ends. So this is a way, if you have a regiment that you know you are going to be getting that Pursuit of Ogham rule, where you're going to be challenging constantly, the Mancer's Apprentice is quite good. Fearless is its own massive buff where you get to ignore the effects of fearsome and terrifying. Very good for the Dweghom. We don't like those things, but yeah, the Mancer Apprentice is very useful. I kind of think of it as like projecting, the leadership and aura of the Holdreg onto a different regiment, right? He's got a representative following them, and so they fight harder. For his options, when it comes to his warband, his mainstay, as always, are going to be Hold Warriors and Ballista. Those are just unanimous and ubiquitous across the army. He also gets Hold Thanes, which are a heavy option, but they also act as kind of as like his equerry, if you will. And initiates again. So we're going to talk about the initiates more, but this is a great way to get them on the table if you're not the biggest fan of the Carol. As for his restricted choices, he's got Dragon Slayers, a massive, fan favorite for Dweghom. The Stone Forged, which is a more defensive, tanky, heavy option. The Ironclad Drake, which we don't have a model for, but it's like a melee version of the Hellbringer. And the Fire Forged, which are the shoulder-mounted magma gun wielding guys. I don't really know why you would take the Fire Forged with him. I haven't come across a good situation for it, but he's cool. Personally, I see the Reg going in with a group of Thanes or Initiates if you wanted to play defensive. You throw the Mancer's Apprentice inside of a reinforced unit of Dragon Slayers, and they can operate almost independently and be very scary about it. Next, we have the Tempered Sorcerer. Again, movement 5, Clash 2, which does matter because you could get into melee. Volley of 3, which is going to matter. And only 3 attacks, 4 wounds. He's a wizard. He doesn't want to be in combat. His special rules, he does have basically a fireball he shoots at people. Barrage 4, range 16 inches, and he is a wizard 6. So that's actually a fantastic wizard score. There's ways to buff that even higher. Now this guy can pull from 3 different schools of magic, which we'll cover each of them here in just a second. But I want to skip down to his options because this does dictate in some ways, depending on the decisions you make, what school of magic you'll take. For his mainstay, of course, Hold Warriors and Hold Ballista. He also gets Stone Forged as a mainstay, which is your heavy defensive infantry, and Fire Forge. So those 2 options that exist as restricted for the Reg are mainstays for this guy. And for his restricted options, he only has 2. The Inferno Automata, which are your mechanico guys who are going to be rushing forward of the battlefield, kind of like wild animals, and the Hellbringer Drake. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about these first is you can actually put the Tempered Sorcerer as a rider of the Hellbringer Drake. When we get to him, you'll see all the different rules it conveys. Essentially, it just kind of makes their card one regiment. So when the Drake opens up its guns and artillery, this guy will shoot his guns as well, even though they're kind of sad. He gets like the Terrifying and Bastion and all these kinds of things from the Hellbringer Drake. However, the caveat to that is you can only choose, I believe it's the Fire School, if you are the Hellbringer Drake. Actually, I was just double-checked and I was wrong about that. I believed that was a restriction before where you had to choose fire, but it doesn't seem that way, and I just tried putting it in the army builder and it works just fine. So I guess choose whatever school of magic you want. Let's dive into these. First up is the Fire School with 3 spells: Coruscation, Fireball, and Flame Wall. First one here is inflict 1 hit per success on the target enemy regiment, range of 16, attunement 4. Again, you're throwing 6 dice at this, hopefully you get at least 2. Fireball, inflict 1 hit per success on the target enemy regiment. These hits have the armor piercing 2 special rule. That's terrific. Range is still 14 inches. That's wonderful. I believe it's 12 in the old edition, so yeah. And then Flame Wall, which is only 8-inch range. It's attunement 3, but it is scaling, so it gets harder on large regiments. Inflict 2 hits per success on the target enemy regiment. If at least 3 successes are scored, Flame Wall also inflicts 1 hit for each file, meaning subsequent subsequent, columns in the target regiment. So a large reinforced one is going to take multiple hits. I'm not going to say it's tactically the best thing, but what I generally do with my sorcerers, I put them on the Hellbringer Drake and I bring that whole big chassis right up behind the front lines, because at that point now the Hellbringer Drake flips its card, it gains Bastion, it's firing or overcharging, as well as the Tempered Sorcerer shooting on top. Then when I get to the Sorcerer's card, now I'm double casting spells because he's generally my Warlord, accruing the power tokens, and it's just that one piece represents 2 command cards and an immense amount of power and disruption for my opponent. Next up is the Earth School. He has 3 spells here: Roots of Stone, Broken Ground, and Rock Shaping. Roots of Stone is a 10-inch range with Attunement 3 and Scaling. Target regiment receives +2 defense, but it cannot perform March, Charge, Reform, Combat Reform, or Withdraw actions until the end of the round. So if you have somebody that you already have on an objective, and you just need them to stay there and stay alive, something like Initiates or just a group of warriors with shields and stuff like that, this is a fantastic way to get use out of them. It's also particularly wonderful if you're sure that one of your regiments is about to take a punch from like a cavalry unit. I'm looking at you, Old Dominion, the Catafroy or something like that. The cavalry unit they have is just brutal on the charge. So hopefully this can knock some wind out of that sail. Next one here is Broken Ground. Range 14, Attunement 3, target regiment cannot perform impact attacks on its next charge. Now, impact attacks are given to you by the impact rule. It basically shuts that down. Another wonderful defensive option, especially if you know, like, this would be great to bring against a Nord player, because they often have impact attacks just by the nature of like they're throwing axes as they're coming in, and hopefully it can kind of offset some of that damage they do. And the last one, Rock Shaping, range 14, Attunement 3. Name a garrison terrain feature within range. You may increase or decrease its defense value by 1. And while that is a really nice utility spell, it is both offensive and defensive by its nature. Generally speaking, I don't see a whole lot of defensive terrain. I went to one event that used it and it was suffocating to the mission. So we kind of steered away from that. But if you are doing something that does have near a garrison terrain, that's a big utility right there. And the last one here is the Magma School. Range 10. For the first one is Eruption, range 10, Attunement 3, and Scaling. Nominate a stand of target enemy regiments that's within range. Then, all regiments, friendly and enemy, within 6 inches of that stand suffer 1 hit for each of their stands within that distance. All hits suffered from the Eruption have armor-piercing 1 special rule. Measure distance to each stand from the closest edge of the nominated stand. These hits are treated as being inflicted from the flank of the regiment. So you pick a singular stand, you say, screw that guy, and everyone within 6 inches of it takes a hit. Every single stand. So if there's 6 stands, you target the command stand right in the dead center. My reading of this is that they would take 6 hits collectively at armor piercing 1, and it comes at them from the flank of the regiment, meaning it's very important when it comes to not so much like resolve test, which I believe it still does affect, but rather getting past the shield special rule, because that only protects you from things coming from your front. The next one here, for some reason it's not loading on my computer, but it's like Magnetic Steep. It's range 10, Attunement 3. Nominate a point on the battlefield within range, even one beneath a regiment, and everything within 3 inches of that point counts as zonal terrain with the Hindering Terrain special rule. The zone feature remains until the end of the round. Essentially, you're kind of making a spike of earth come out right under a specific point. Now, the way you use this tactically is that if you were to, say, target one of your own regiments and put that square, like that marker, right at the front line of where the command stand is, if they get charged, if any opposing enemy unit comes over that terrain feature on the charge, the hindering one, they lose all charge bonuses. It essentially, again, another defensive way to minimize getting charged real hard. And the Dweghom actually have officer attachments and stuff like that that make you better if you're in a defensible terrain. And so this is a way to get those bonuses anywhere on the field too. So it's good. It's a little power play. Like, you have to know how to use it, but it is a good utility if you know the rules surrounding hinder. And the last one here is Pyroclast. Range 12. Attunement 3, target a piece of garrisonable terrain occupied by an enemy regiment. Enemy regiments occupying it gain the Decay 4 special rule. That's, again, We don't use them a whole lot locally, but if your local group does, that's a brutal spell. It essentially means they're taking 4 hits per stand just for being in the building. It's like he's cooking it from the outside and all the dudes inside are just melting like little army men. And our last option here is the Tempered Steel Shaper. He's a wizard, so we're not even going to worry about his stat line. He's got nothing impressive to brag about. He also has a gun, essentially shooting magic missiles. Barrage 4, his volley's 2, so he's alright. Range of 18, and he's a 5 level. Now, unlike our sorcerer, who has different schools, this guy has 3 spells across the board. The first one is Hone Blades, range 12, attunement 3, and scaling. The target regiment adds +1 to its clash characteristic until the end of the round. There is literally no regiment in this army that doesn't benefit from having +1 clash. It's not a inspire action, so it does stack with inspire, so you gotta remember that as well. Next is Unmake Armor, range 12, attunement 3, and scaling. Target regiment suffers -1 to its defensive characteristic until the end of the round. Again, it's a way to get past your opponent's armor that's not clean. Wonderful. And lastly is Temper Plate, 12-inch range, attunement 3, and scaling. Again, the regiment gains the hardened +1 special rule, meaning it allows a regiment of yours to ignore a point of cleave. And those 3 spells are fantastic utility. Like I'm saying, there's no game in which you don't benefit from those. They don't affect resolve, so it doesn't matter if you're playing Old Dominion. If you can remove some of their armor to cut through deeper, that's even better. At 85 points, he's a great little buff piece. And for his troops, as a mainstay, of course, Hold Warriors and Ballista, he also gets Stone Forged and Fire Forged, just like the other sorcerer, except for his restricted, he gets Steel Forged and Magma Forged. Again, another Magma Forge. We're gonna have to take a look at those guys. Closing out my thoughts on the heroes section here, the big go-tos for me are the Tempered Sorcerer and the Steel Shaper. They're utility boxes in the way that wizards have benefited from this particular, edition change and update is massive. I mean, these are like Swiss Army knife characters depending on which school of magic you choose. For the sorcerer, the Steel Shaper is just a bargain at any price. Him and just like a unit of Hold Warriors, to be dirt cheap about it, is still a great investment because he can buff anything else in the faction provided he's in range. So you'll see a lot of those. For me personally, just because of the way I like to play a little bit more on the thematic side, I really do like the Hold Rake because I want to get value out of the Pursuit of Ogham rule. I think it makes lists real mean, and that regiments that people don't expect to be able to do much can rush up and pick a fight and kind of surprise everybody. But because of how good the Tempered Creed is in general from your basic army rules, your Sorcerer and Steel Shaper are pretty much going to be your main go-tos. Like thematically, I might have the Hold Rake be my general, but if I still include these guys, I can still say the whole thing is a tempered list and I'm still generating power tokens and that kind of stuff. So it's not like I'm crippling the army by saying the Hold Rake is my general. All it does is slow down a little bit the accumulation of those power points, those markers for auto-passing stuff from the sorcerer because he's not getting a second spell. But with that out of the way, we have a whole roster of regiments to talk about. And I gotta be honest, I'm gonna stick to the ones that have miniatures at this point, the time of recording, which is February 1st of 2023. The reason for that is there's just a lot of entries, and frankly, you're not going to see play out of most of them until they have miniatures. It's just, that's where they get, I think, the real polish with the rules, the real focus, because a lot of these things are they're out there for testing, but again, they're not pushing them because they're not products available for it. So I'd rather focus on the things that the company knew going into this edition that they would have. Let's start, let's start at the bottom. I'm going to start with the Humble Hold Warrior. This is our basic dude. Every single leader has access to warriors and ballista, so let's start there. Movement of 5, volley 1, doesn't matter. Clash of 2, 4 attacks, 5 wounds, resolve 2, defense 2, evasion 0. That is a sad profile because this is your cheapest boy. They start off in regiments of 3, so you're going to have 3 stands, all with that same profile. A few modifications to the command stand if you're taking the Reg as your general. Of course, he gets +1 attack. And as far as command models, they can have a standard bearer, just like everybody else can for re-rolling charges. In addition, it adds +1 to the second march action. And this is important because if you have the Reg as your leader, remember he adds +1 to the first march action. So if you have a standard bearer in any of your regiments, they're getting +2. Now we're going to talk about the officers now because they can take the most options of them and quite frankly, this is the best place to talk about it, because this is your basic infantry where we can use officers to craft this into a different kind of unit, to be more defensive, to be cheap chaff. We can do a lot of stuff. So let's see. First one here, Herald of Stone. It gains the Bastion draw event, which is just +1 to defense. That would bring them up to defense 3, and then if they are attacked from the front arc, they have shield, which makes them defense 4. For that reason, you'll often see a Herald of Stone just to have a unit of these guys on an objective waiting out the game, because they're just hard to shift. They just require so much more work to move than, kind of like an equivalent in an opponent's army can do. Next is the Herald of Magma. This regiment gains the Aura of Death 2 special rule, and in addition, an attached character stand add +1 to its attack characteristic during a dual action. Aura of Death. If a opponent activates while in base contact with the Hold Warriors, they take 2 hits for every Hold Warrior stand that they're engaged with. So if it's a 3-man unit and they get charged, the next time that enemy activates, they're going to take 3 basically Aura of Death hits. Sorry, 3 stands worth. That's 6 dice total, because each of them has Aura of Death too. If you're looking to have them be like a tar pit and just kind of get in the way of the enemy, Aura of Death is a great way to do that. Have units that you don't care about that just exist to cause headaches for your opponent. And then there's the Herald of Fire, which is +1 to the attack's characteristic, and the command stand gains +2 to its attack characteristic instead, and any characters attached get +1 clash. This one is an interesting option, the Herald of Fire, because it gives +2 to the command stand. That does synchronize with our hold rakes +1. So maybe while not the most effective choice when it comes to the Hold Warriors, it can boost up a command stand's attacks pretty awesome. And lastly is the Exemplar. Add +1 to your resolve, which is fantastic for these guys. Resolve 3 would be much more appreciated. The command stand adds +2 to its attacks, and in addition, any character attached adds +1 to its defense characteristic during a duel. I will say, having looked at this now with a little bit of thought behind it, I do think the Exemplar is a great choice, specifically if you're trying to keep things cheap. He's 15 points compared to some of the other options here. If you're just trying to get the command stand up to be able to, attack people and do the Pursuit of Dweghom ability, that's not a bad idea. Other quick note, these guys are infantry and they are medium, so they'll be coming in as early as round 2. The other option that everybody has are the Hold Ballista. Movement 5, Volley 2, which matters because they're archers, Ballista. Clash 1, attacks 4, 5 wounds, resolve 2, defense 2. It all looks familiar here. What's interesting about these guys, right off the bat, within the context of the Dweghom army, they are light, meaning they presumably will come on the board faster and move up the, to secure objectives and that kind of stuff. They can't claim them, but they can contest them from your opponent and just kind of set the line of engagement further forward. So they have shield, a light unit that has shield, and also a gun. Barrage 3, range 18 inches, armor piercing 1. Considering that most of their light stuff early game they're going to be going against probably doesn't have a whole lot of defense, armor piercing 1 is fantastic on these guys. If you have a regiment of 3, which is kind of the base size, 9 shots, if you aim, you go to volley 3, you're getting a few in. Shooting's not meant to be massive in this game. They don't want it to be like that, but if you can throw a few wounds on a stand here or there, if your opponent has healing, now they're having to decide where it goes, and decisions breed opportunities for you to pounce upon. Now they can have a lot of the same command options. Frankly, I wouldn't take them. These guys exist to run up the board and shoot and distract, and also to be there to take a charge. When their usefulness is up and the rest of your army's kind of like in position, these guys are wonderful to just let them take the charge. They have a shield. They're going to be defense 3 from the front. That's not bad. If you want to get really fancy with them, turn 1, of course, you're running up and charging. Turns 1 through 3, you're essentially trying to get as much shooting value out of them as possible. But then when you know that they're going to be charged and die, just have them reform to be at a wonky angle. See if you can bait your opponent into showing their flanks when they charge these guys. Yeah, your unit has maybe done 6 wounds, maybe, over the course of 2 or 3 turns. But if they do that and leave an important, defense removing piece from your opponent's army, they expose that flank on there, you can counterpunch real hard, and all of a sudden these ballistas have swung their value very hard. Now I'm going to skip over to our third hold option. That's the Thanes. Now, of course, these guys are not nearly as ubiquitous as the Warriors and the Ballista. These are really only takeable by the Reg structurally, but they are quite interesting because they're kind of a next evolution of that basic infantry idea. They're infantry, of course, like I said, heavy, meaning they're going to come in a little bit later. For that, they get movement 5, volley 1, doesn't matter. Clash 3 is terrific if you can also inspire. 4 attacks for each stand, 5 wound, 3 resolve, 3 defense. As far as special rules go, they also have shield, so it's going to be an average of 4 defense, which is wonderful. They have Cleave 1. Cleave is just a great rule anywhere you can get it. And Hardened 1, meaning things that have Cleave don't do as well against them. They're more defensive. Now, they can take all the same options that the Warriors could with the exception of the Exemplar. But the Herald of Stone gives them Bastion, so now we're talking defense 5 with Hardened 1. That's a tough nut to crack. You can give them the Herald of Fire, and now all of a sudden they have Aura of Death, which is not my favorite thing for this particular regiment, but if you try to get them as defensive as possible with other buffs, that could be really good too. And then Herald of Magma, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Herald of Magma gives them Aura of Death. Herald of Fire is +1 to their attacks characteristic, and the Command Stand gets +2, which given you have Cleave 1, it's an attack that has a lot of meaningful impact if it lands. That's great. These guys used to be a medium option. I understand why they moved them to heavy. They can be a nasty tank unit. They really can. This is another option if you just have a regiment by themselves. You can throw the Mamancer's Apprentice that you get from having your Rig in with them, and they become very self-sufficient, especially because they have a much better resolve stat. So with all our basic stuff out of the way, let's start moving through some of the unique choices here. We have the Dragon Slayers, a crowd favorite for 200 points. At the moment, you get a heavy infantry, again, very slow moving, but this is another one where you have to remember the Dweghom rule that allows you to ignore enemies when it comes to your reinforcement line. In my last event, I had a unit of Dragon Slayers come in from a flank and just dead charge an opposing army. Like, they came in at the end of a round and just stood there, and the first action the next round was them charging. You can't charge the turn you come in, but these guys just posed a very real threat, put my opponent on tilt. That's exactly what their job is. Movement 5, no volley, clash of 4, which is amazing. 5 attacks, 6 wounds, 4 resolve, 3 defense, and 0 of 8. They also get Cleave 3. Cleave 3 is a gross rule, guys. I'm not even gonna lie to you. If I had to have my personal thing, it would be Cleave 2, and Cleave 3 would just be resolved or reserved for heroes, but they are nasty. They also have Fiend Hunter, which matters immensely because it's changed in this edition. It used to be like reroll hit rolls against monsters. Now it's monsters and brutes. So it went from being pretty niche to all of a sudden half of everyone's army all of a sudden gets rerolls against it, and they have Hardened 2, so Cleave stuff really does not work well against them. They're a highly defensive unit, and you have to remember, oh man, there's just so many good things. You can add the Mamancer's Apprentice to these guys too. Giving them Fearless is great, but also, at that point, if you have the Rig as your general, these guys are already rocking 6 attacks on the command stand. 6 attacks, Cleave 3, Fiend Hunter, and going in with Hardened 2, and they're going to be able to challenge people, and if those units decline, they break. Oh yeah, every day and twice on Sunday. That's amazing. This is one I think points wise we're going to see a few adjustments for, but I like the direction they're going. Next are the Fire Forged. Movement 5, volley 2, clash 2, 3 attacks, 5 wounds. That's nice. A resolve 4, defense 3. Special rules. Here's another shooting unit with a shield. Again, a very interesting Dweghom unique thing. So shield brings them up to defense 4 in their front arc. They are barrage 4 for each stand, of course. 14 inches of range and armor piercing 2. For their officers, they can take the Herald of Fire. Again, this one gives them +1 at attack characteristic, and the command stand gets more. That's probably the most mute point for them. But their other option is the Flame Caster, and it gains the Torrential Fire special rule, which is when a stand with this special rule makes a volley action targeting an enemy regiment within half its barrage range, so in this case within 7 inches, each successful hit roll causes an additional automatic hit on the target. These additional shots do not benefit from this special rule. So you can, it's basically like rapid fire, right? You just lay down all kinds of hits on your opponent. Getting these guys within 7 inches is a tall order, but they don't have a lot of risk in doing so, right? They have way better defensive stats than like a shooting unit like crossbowmen or something like that. So they can actually get up in there and not be totally devastated if they end up not shooting, but it's a gamble. Really the question is, are you getting the value out of the armor piercing too? Because I've had situations where I just needed numerically more shots. So I would have rather have taken, more ballistas rather than these guys, just because of the sheer volume of shots that I can get out there. Now, the Fire Forged are like a high quality version of the ballistas, but they're medium instead of light. So they have different roles they kind of fill. You'll always see me with a regiment of them because dwarves with magma shoulder cannons like the Predator is just too cool to not take. Next we come to the Flame Berserkers. These guys took, in my opinion, a little bit of a hit in this edition. Movement 5, volley 1, clash 3, which is great. 6 attacks, wounds of 5, resolve 5. That has helped out immensely before. Defense 3, evasion 0, and their only special rule is Aura of Death. Now for me personally, I like the Flame Berserkers as a way to set that reinforcement line as far forward as possible and not much else. In the last edition they had Flurry, which gave them rerolling hit rolls, which would make them a pretty nasty little target, or aggressive like light to rush up the board and kind of deal with your opponent's lights. They lost that. They still have Aura of Death, which is awesome. Aura of Death can be gross. I just don't find it nearly as impactful as the Flurry was. Next up is the Hellbringer Drake. This is my boy. Giant monster, and it's a medium, so it actually comes onto the board earlier than a lot of other large beasts like the Apex Predator, that kind of stuff, and starts mingling early. I said Apex Predator, I meant the Abomination, but you know what I mean. Movement of 7, which is very generous. Volley 2, Clash 2, 8 attacks, wounds of 14, resolve 3, defense 3, and evasion 2. I don't know how the heck this fat guy is evasing, but he's doing it better than the little dude. For his special rule, he's got a whole bunch here. So cleave 1, meaning when he attacks in melee, he gets cleave, which is great. Terrifying as a negative modifier to your opponent's resolve is also great. Impact 5, when he charges in, he just does a bunch of damage. These are wonderful buffs to have for a giant monster. We can see he's not really a melee beast though, right? 8 attacks, clash 2, 3 if he's on the charge or gets inspired. Even with impact and terrifying, that's not like a melee powerhouse. But he gets real stinking good when it comes to his special rules below that, which are Barrage 10 and the range of 16 inches. Dang, dang, dang. With that is an armor-piercing 1 shot, and he grants him the Overcharge ability. This is essentially a way that the Hellbringer Drake can kind of like hock a loogie, right? He banks up these points, Overcharge tokens if you will, and at your next shooting action or volley action, you can discard any number of overcharge markers, and for each one you get rid of, you get +2 barrage, meaning it goes from 10 to 12 to 14, or how many you get rid of, and you add +1 to the armor piercing. And the regiment attached to it, meaning the wizard on top, he doesn't benefit from any of that, so ignore that. But this is absolutely terrific. So if he walks on the board and immediately overcharges, it's an action, so you have to do that, you'll start banking those coins, and then when you have your prime target right in the dead set of your eyes, just spend the whole bank and just get rid of that thing. And what's great is that he can keep fighting in the meantime. He doesn't have to spend the tokens at the next specific shooting action. It's just at the next shooting action, if you have any tokens, you can spend them. So that's really nice, and you can take him just like this, medium, monster, all kind of stuff. You can just have a nobody on top, or you can put the spellcaster on there. I just think it looks cool to have the wizard shooting left and right like he's John Wayne with fireballs. It's pretty epic. And when their profiles merge, he does get a Bastion. It's part of their rider rules that kind of brings it all in. So it's very cool. They got a lot of things going on. We already went through all of the different hold options. Let's look at the Inferno Automata. These are a brute unit, and they are light. These are the restricted choice for the Tempered Sorcerer, and they're basically these like mechano men that are just meant to act like crazy, machinations on the battlefield. Fearsome. We'll go through the rules here. Actually, let's start off with the stat line. Movement of 8, which is super speedy in this army. Volley 1, Clash 3, 4 attacks, 5 wounds, resolve 3, defense 3, evasion 2. Why is it that the inanimate objects can always evade things faster than the living, highly reactive dwarves? I don't know. But he has the Fearsome rule. Enemy regiments in contact with this regiment must roll a d6 before being able to perform a combat rally or combat reform action. If the result is less than or equal to the highest resolve characteristic in the regiment, you may perform an action as normal. If the result's higher, then the action fails. It just gives you a threshold for success when it comes to trying to do reforms. Irregular, this regiment does not affect friendly and enemy reinforcement lines, and a stand without the special rule may not join this regiment. This is just really to curtail that speed stat. Now, really the option you have for your lights that are going to be setting the reinforcement line are going to be your ballistas or your flame berserk. Fluid formation makes them highly mobile. This gives them a free reform action during its activation, position. There's some rules about when you can do it, but essentially it allows you to kind of pivot and turn these guys and be very aggressive with their positioning. They also have Aura of Death 2, which is a wonderful augment to their damage output. Because, if they charge in, they're doing Impact 2, which is the next rule. They're going to be clashing on 4s with 5 dice. Yeah, that's great. And then when the opponent activates next, they have to take the Aura of Death hits. This is a wonderful thing. The only negative thing I could possibly say about the Automata is having to spend your precious Hellbringer Drake restricted choices to bring these guys. And it's kind of in jest. There's always room for Automata because they can just position so aggressively. Next are the Initiates. This is again one of the newer kits. The Holdrake just recently got the ability to take these guys as mainstay. They are infantry, they are medium. So again, they're competing with Hold Warriors for that kind of space of just dudes. But let's take a look at their stats here. They got a movement of 5, volley 1, clash 2, 3 attacks, so almost no attacks whatsoever, 5 wounds, resolve 3, defense 3, and evasion 0. For their special rules, they have Devout, which anytime there's a buff basically put on them, they get to add an automatic success of 1, so that's really great for them. They can kind of like channel those things. They receive buffs really, really well. Next thing is Shield, meaning from the front arc, they are functionally defense 4. Iron Discipline, which has become quickly one of my favorite rules in my last event. This regiment suffers no penalties for having enemy regiments in contact with its flank or rear. And it is also able to benefit from the Support X special rule and is not required to reroll successful morale tests. This allowed me to take this huge block and use it as sort of like an end cap to my flanks because I didn't care if they got hit from the side. And they do have support too, so the more ranks that you have, the more, just weight of dice you'll throw in. But I mean, they're only throwing 3 dice if they're up front anyway. These are often seen as a slightly more defensible version of the Warriors, but here's the thing with the Warriors is they're cheaper. You could also throw on a Herald of Stone for, I think, about the same price. If not, it's very close. And it's just a matter of what you want to do. If you love the models like I do, I'll find reasons to take them. Like, for the same reason that I kit out Hold Warriors as being highly defensive, these guys fill the same role. I just worry less about getting hit from the sides, and I don't expect anything out of them from melee, even less so than the Warriors. And our last kit that we actually have available to us are the Wardens. This is the other build from the Initiates box. Movement to 5, volley 1, clash 3, which is pretty good, 6 attacks, much more beefy, 5 wounds, resolve 4, defense 3, and evasion 0. For their special rules, they have a few good ones here. Cleave 1, which is always great on a basic infantry unit, especially mediums. That's just great because before, I was taking Thanes to be able to get, Cleave 1 reliably. Devout, again, they get that same rule as the Initiates. They receive buffs very, very well. And Fearless, they do not suffer any kind of negative modifiers from Terrifying or something like that, which, as someone who has a lot of Old Dominion players nearby, ends up being very relevant. So friends, that is it for the entire roster of the Dweghom in 2.0 of Conquest Last Argument of Kings. Overall thoughts here at the end. I definitely think you're going to see the Holdrake and the Sorcerer, Tempered Sorcerer, be your main option. You're going to also probably see the Steel Shaper in most lists just because it's a great set of utility spells that are just useful in every situation. The Karawa, I think, loses some steam. I think the real thing that keeps him in play at the moment is Wardens. If you're looking for an alternative to do some basic combat instead of Warriors, Wardens are a great option for that. But on the whole, I think you're going to see the Tempered Creed being used a whole lot with regs to be able to deliver some of those big Hailmaker swings when it comes to Dragon Slayers and Thanes and stuff like that. Some conventional wisdom that you see a lot on the Discord for Parabellum is taking, the ballistas, rushing forward, trying to plink off as few wounds as possible. Again, gum up the works, get in the way, maybe set up some good counter charges while everything else kind of plods its way up the field. This is a slow army by design, but if you can pin an enemy down and then come in from the side flank, with your ignoring enemy models for reinforcement line stuff, that's a big... If you're curious as to how this affects the one-player starter set, very little. I think the value is still there. The Holdrake is still a great choice for a leader. Again, he can take the Tempered Creed, so if you bought that box and you just tack on either a Sorcerer or a Steel Shaper, all of a sudden you have access to those elemental power things and you're banging on all cylinders. You're always going to need Warriors. The Ballista are great. Honestly, if you got that set, I'm probably going to buy another one here at some point. I'm going to go for 2 units of Ballista because at this point I don't have any, and then probably Thanes and Dragon Slayers as a mix for those other 2. That is to say, it's still one of the best army starters out there in terms of models that you will actually regularly use. Just about everything in there. I think the Dweghom came out very well in 2.0, especially with the changes to shooting and the way that wizards work, because some factions have more or less shooting. The Dweghom tend to have more quality shooting, at least, if not numeric. So they have more quality shooting as well as powerful magic. So if you're a faction that can, you know, kind of glean the benefit of both of those things, you're in a good position this edition, and definitely the Dweghom can do that. I would love to hear your thoughts. What kind of list you're going to be running? For me, as I said before, probably Holdreg as my general. I want to be using Pursuit of Ogham, and then figuring out ways to maximize my heavy hitter units that have all kinds of buffs and bonuses, as well as chaff stuff like the Initiates to be able to absorb charges, kind of deflect some of my opponent's attempts at flanking. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming.